In the case of Peru, unfortunately, it's not a very nice story. Definitely, as a lot more, I think that all Latin American countries have signed the Convention 1699 ILO. Unfortunately, not all are enforcing this convention. So, because of this, many indigenous groups have asked various times for their governments to implement the convention through specific legislation that should be enacted in their countries. And in the case of Peru, there was unfortunate, something very unfortunate that happened, that when indigenous peoples were protesting against some activity that the government wanted to implement, there was a lot of legislation that was being enacted by the executive branch of the government. These indigenous peoples reacted against it because definitely some of these legislation were going against their rights. So because of this problem, well, from this problem emerged a solution and an interesting way in which, unfortunately, there were people that were there, both by the policemen that were there and the military that were there and indigenous groups. But from these came a new challenge and an open space of dialogue where the government definitely said, okay, let's sit down, let's negotiate, let's try to implement legislation. And I think this was a very positive attitude from the government. Definitely it was not the best the best process how to start, but definitely now we have a consultation law, regulations, and now 2 specific consultation processes are taking place in Peru.
Yes, David, and then we'll take your question also, so that way we can straight to the respondents.
Thanks so much, Dave Richards, apparently the father of a net husband in fact. Not sure how good that is for my reputation in some quarter. Thank you, John. A couple of questions related. If more countries are bringing in offset legislation and there are mechanisms in place we know about to lower the transaction costs for people to implement offsets, does that mean that more sectors than the traditional mining and oil and gas are going to be doing and required to do offsets? One question. The other one is another thorn in the side for respective industries is how are state companies going to be brought into the same kind of condition as the private sector brought into? In some countries, the state mining sector is one of the biggest operators, and these are being implemented more widely across the world. Isn't it realistically expecting those to be brought into the same level of expectation and performance?
Thanks, Dave. I'm trying to remember the first question now. What was it? Oh, yes. So, the mining sector has led the development of biodiversity offset approaches and no net loss, really in a voluntary way. I mapped it out as a response to government policy that both happened in tandem. No net loss is easier for mining and oil and gas. It's interesting that no oil and gas company has made such a commitment, essentially because the ratio between the footprint and the revenue is so great. It's much less likely that other sectors such as agriculture and forestry, etc., will be able to do no net loss and biodiversity because the extent of essentially natural habitat that's taken up for agriculture is so great that the revenues are not so great. If the offset policy, I think the question is if offset policies are put in place by governments, and yes, we would expect all the sectors to comply. Certainly the European Union no net loss working group is considering the application of no net loss as a principle for all business across the European Union. It's true that if governments put in place those policies, many of the sectors simply wouldn't be able to comply, either A, because it takes too long and costs too much, or B, because it's actually technically unfeasible. So we do need some more flexible mechanisms to allow other sectors to respond to those laws, right?
Yes, and that will be the last question because we are getting to the end of our session, please.
Yes, thank you. Faye Tibi, I come from the SEN Oceania Regional Office. Thanks to the panelists. My comment or question really has to do with this following small activity that we have coming up in October. And it's called the Prime Minister's, the Solomon Islands Prime Minister's Roundtable on Development, Environment and Society, which will be held at the beginning of October. And this really has to do with the issue of development and climate change and the private sector. As you know, in Solomon Islands there is a big issue about logging and the extractive industry. And the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands has said that they cannot continue that development path. And so, in compliments to ICN, they came and approached ICN as a confident partner to say, what can we do about this problem? My question to you as expert panelists is the following. Do we or can we put a cap on profit? It's a mind cap. The question really, I think our comment, our panelist, Mr. Khan, alluded to it in the discussions or beginnings of the discussion around what is it that we define growth by and what is it we should hold on to in the future. Is it biodiversity? Is it economic growth? Is it profit, environment, etc.? So my question for you is really the following. Can we put a cap to profit? If that's the case, can we address green growth in a different way other than saying we are doing environmentally friendly business models, but not changing the fundamental assets? Thank you.
Now that's not a small question, and I don't think it's a question that we can answer here that quickly, but clearly I think Peter Bakker alluded to it this morning. We are talking about when we start really valuing natural capital and really having then the financial capital, the social capital and natural capital being on equal footing, then at least there's a balancing of these various capitals. There's not necessarily a capping of your profit, but hopefully there will be a balancing of the various values out there. So unfortunately I think we are out of time, but the panel will also be at the happy hour, aren't you? At 7 to 9, which will be at the Business and Economy Pavilion. So there you will have plenty of time to ask them more precise questions. I thank them very much for their intervention. And I'm very lucky because I've got Josh Bishop as rapporteur that will actually give you the summary of this session. So I don't have to do it, which is wonderful. Thank you, Josh.
I took away from the comments they made, which were, to be fair, not all so optimistic. One phrase we heard is, the system is broken, both in its social and environmental terms. And that the kind of changes that are required are really quite deep. Changes in market values and valuations, but also in our personal visions of success, how we measure success at an individual level, at a corporate level, and at a national level. Those are major challenges the future leaders have put to us. And I'm going to come back to that at the end. Then in response, I suppose, in this session here, starting with Paul Engberg Peterson's keynote, we heard an agenda for public policy actions. What are some things that we could do to try and fix this broken system? And he mentioned changing our accounting systems. He focused on green GDP, but I think the same applies at a corporate level. Accounting systems don't just apply to governments, and we can green the accounts of companies as well as of nations. Paul talked about policies to encourage investment in natural capital. He mentioned the need to strengthen governance systems for natural resource management, particularly at a national level. He talked about landscape level approaches, and he made a plea for reviving the concept of payment for ecosystem services and scaling that up suggesting that we need some kind of breakthrough, that perhaps people haven't been talking about PES as much recently, and asking why. We then heard from the panel, the esteemed eminent panel here before you, and I'll just run through some of the takeaways that I noted from their interventions. John Ekstrom talked a lot about offsets, no net loss, net positive impact, and the fact that policy in many countries is now outstripping the tools that are in place to actually implement those policies, but that the conservation community has a potential role there in helping governments and business to make those policies effective. He went on to suggest that those policies could take the form of regional or even national level offset banking and trading schemes, while recognizing the limits of those schemes for certain sectors, notably agriculture, which might find it impossible to comply. We heard also from Milagros about this new consultation process, the new law in Peru. Looking for new ways, more inclusive ways to involve previously marginalized communities in public policy, in decision making, in investment allocation. And she acknowledged that this new law on consultation, trying to put into effect the concept of free, prior, and informed consent, might have scared some investors off. But on the other hand, it might provide greater clarity and transparency to other investors who could see the benefit of that. Lorianne Ponzo from the IFC talked about the leverage of the performance standards that the IFC developed in consultation with God knows how many stakeholders, from public and private and civil society. And was it worth the effort? Well, I hope you would all agree with me that if it seriously really influences the tens of billions of dollars of investment that it's intended to influence, then yes, that effort is certainly worthwhile. And she emphasized the challenge of balancing the need for credibility and effectiveness from an environmental perspective with something that is actually realistic and it can be implemented by business. Not an easy balancing act by any means. And she highlighted also the challenge that we talk a lot about the leading companies and what the best governments are doing in the policy space, but we should remember there are many companies doing little or nothing, and many governments, sad to say, are colluding in that. And maybe that's a role for IUCN, through the NGOs, through the watchdog role that some NGOs play, to try and ensure that not only companies live up to best practice and that we have clear guidelines, but that governments also live up to best practice in these areas. I think we do that already, but perhaps we could do it more systematically. I'm going to skip over the presentation by Supo Kang, if I've said that correctly. I want to come back to that because I think that's a critical contribution, and talk briefly about what Harold Lossack said, acknowledging that official aid is not going to get us where we need to be on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and I think we all acknowledge that. He emphasized the role of public-private partnerships. I know from my own exchanges with people in AUSAID that that's a tricky ground for a public agency to use public money in partnership with private money without being accused of subsidizing private profitability. And so there's a challenge there. He talked about working together on best practice guidelines, on training, on education, helping to develop new business models, and mentioned particularly the example of the work with Chiquita on biodiversity in bananas, I suppose we could call it. I want to come back now. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to come back to the presentation from the President's Committee on Green Growth. I think this is an excellent example of what happens when you have political courage in a country to really try to fix a broken system, to try to develop a new paradigm for the economy. This is no small thing, and there's still lots of work that needs to be done, but I was struck in particular by the emphasis on improving the quality of growth, recognizing the role of technology innovation in doing that, recognizing the need to attract private sector investment by creating markets working on both the demand side and the supply side, the need to really ensconce sustainability, sorry for the word, to really establish sustainability in law, through basic law, not just regulatory policies which new governments can sweep away so easily. And he also highlighted the role of government investment. Government spends a lot of money. So the fiscal policy, government purchasing policy can also drive and reinforce what business is doing. He mentioned the need not just for top-down interventions, but bottom-up, changing the conversation, influencing culture, education, lifestyle. It really is a fundamental top-to-bottom, front-to-back approach. And I look forward to hearing more about the biodiversity policy of Korea's Green Growth Initiative. With that, I just want to make a final comment, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves of the history a little bit, of where we've come from. I think we're in a transition, right, over a relatively short period of time, maybe 200 years. You look back, and not so long ago, the role of governments was to facilitate and encourage the exploitation of natural resources. We treated nature as inexhaustible. And we're now trying to feel our way to a world that is perhaps only dimly perceived, in which consumers are offered health and happiness instead of material satisfactions, in which companies make profits from conserving and restoring natural capital and from reducing poverty, and where democratically accountable governments set and enforce rules and offer incentives that make all this possible. To me, that means a new mission for governments, and it is the basis for new missions for business. And I look forward to hearing more about how in the next session we can put some of these ideas into practice. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot for another excellent summary by Josh. We're very glad that you volunteered. And as this is going to be an input into the future cooperation between IUCN and WBCSD, we look forward to your write-up of your verbal comments as an input. Now, let's thank Gerard and this panel with a very warm hand. Thanks for a very So now we have something called the final reflections panel, and it seems a little bit like speed dating to me given the time that's available for this. So if we can ask the participants that you see on the screen here to come up, and I hope we have them in the room here. I see 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, and here is Rafiq as well. So, I think you have your panel. And here comes Mike. Welcome. So, the panel is complete. So, it's over to you, Peter, and welcome to the panel.
Okay, we're going to do a speed dating now. I have the incredible honor of introducing this panel to you. And I need to warn them, despite all their incredible knowledge and experience, they have no more than 2 minutes each to talk. So that's where the speed dating part comes. I think we have a slight change of composition to where I thought we were, but we are Vicky from Teba, right? Then we have Allard from Shell. We have, I should know this. Gary, the first dialogue. Hey Gary. Then we have Adi Sonna Hall from Warehouser. She's your future leader team. There was a remaining question in the future leader team. Maybe you can include that in your statement. why did you volunteer to be a future leader for sustainable development? So she will take that question on. Then we're moving over to Mohammed Rafiq, Rainforest Alliance, and then right at the end, Mike Mack. So I apologize, I do you no justice, but you have maximum 2 minutes of noise. You are asked to play back to the audience. What did you learn today? What of all the things that you've heard today was truly new when it comes to biodiversity and ecosystems? Or if there wasn't anything new, what is your recommendation on how we're going to scale up the solutions towards a better biodiversity and ecosystem in the world? So, shall we start with you, Vicky? Oh, okay, good. You want to go in that order? Mohammed, you're first.
Okay.
The microphone is still on the table.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity of being here. My reflections would be a mix of what I have heard, what I think, and what I know from what we do in Rainforest Alliance.